Greetings. My name is Antonia Ruth Coleman, and I am the Program Coordinator for the Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation. As we turn the corner to our 20th year at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, this moment centering the state of Virginia as the historical ground zero place for our truth-telling process is essential to our work. Join us as we listen to the conversation between Delegate Delores McQuinn of the Virginia House of Delegates and Dr. Iva Carruthers, General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and the Executive Director for the Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation. This moment is sponsored and moderated by the Center for African American History and Culture of Virginia Union. This moment foregrounds the significant work that we will be calling forth remembrance of our ancestors, telling the truth in a pandemic where lies grow like weeds in fertile ground, and we are unapologetic to situate faith, theology, ministry in the public discourse on reparations to address centuries of foundational and systemic racism in America grounded in faith. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Virginia Union University and welcome to Ground Zero, a conversation about reparations, RVA, and the struggle for Black racial justice in the United States. We're excited to host this event along with a host of events during Black History Month. My name is Cleve Tinsley. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for African American History and Culture, a comprehensive, full-scale humanities and social sciences research and cultural center bringing out top-notch work for today. Today, we wanted to revisit a conversation that we were a part of not long ago regarding Reparations Sunday here in Richmond, Virginia. And we had the pleasure then of speaking with our two guests on today, Delegate Delores McQuinn and Dr. Iva Carruthers, not only about what reparations means broadly, but what it really means for Richmond and why it's the center point. And tonight, we'll be doing that. But how do we enter into this conversation? We've said last time when we spoke, since the summer of 2019 especially, there has been renewed momentum and energy around racial reckoning and Black racial justice worldwide, but especially here in the US. Furthermore, Black communities and institutions have received increased attention. There's been an internal joke, in fact, among some of us who've been involved in this work for a while, that this is a hot moment, a kind of Black tax, which means a time when Black communities are appreciated and acknowledged finally, in material ways, but always in ways that we should have always been acknowledged. How long will this last is the question. Recently, me and my guest today were recently on a shared panel, Reparations Sunday RVA. It's a movement associated with a larger national and worldwide consideration of forms of compensation, healing, education, and restitution and guarantees of non-repeat in calls for reparations. We all agreed with one vision, that a robust consideration of reparation realizes that there's not only a spiritual, moral, and material practice, but there are material practices connected to it. In our last discussion, we sought to uncover more about the relational aspects of reparations through healing, spiritual, moral, and material harm. A unifying vision was shared in our last session, that there is possible for us to have a world that is held accountable for past harms, including slavery, colonialism, genocide, and other material and moral abuses. These past harms create the present conditions in which we live and impact our future. Any discussion then of reconciliation is only possible when we can have and envision a world where racism is no more. Today, we'd like to continue that conversation, sparking new ideas, hopefully, for more partnership. But before we do that, we want to reintroduce or represent to some of you our guest for tonight, for those who may be tuning in for the first time. We want to say a word about them now, and I'll yield now to my colleague, Dr. Marquita Carmichael.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tinsley. It is my honor to share tonight the bios for our esteemed delegate, Reverend Dr. Delores L. McQuinn. Delegate McQuinn is a native of Richmond, Virginia, and she has been a trailblazer in local and statewide politics, serving on the Richmond City School Board, the Richmond City Council, and since 2009 as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates. Delegate McQuinn, a champion for those who have been marginalized and underserved, patroned since 2009 legislation in recognition of African American cemeteries. She's an advocate for locating African American history in the Commonwealth. She was the chief patron for legislation that created a commission to study the impact of slavery and its long-term impact on African Americans in Virginia. That commission is charged with producing a comprehensive report to the General Assembly that includes suggestions and recommendations which would remedy some of the disparities documented by the commission's study and research. The delegate chairs the Richmond Slave Trail Commission, which presented a plan for creating a National Slavery Museum and Genealogy Center in the city's historical Shockoe Bottom District. Through Delegate McQuinn's leadership, the commission has been successful in securing $21 million in state funding for the project. She also introduced legislation to establish the Virginia African American Cultural Resource Task Force in 2017. The legislation established a bipartisan statewide task force to help identify, promote, and conserve Virginia's Black cultural resources, especially places connected to Virginians born into slavery. Delegate McQuinn was chief patron of the Crown Act, which made Virginia the 4th state in the country to pass a law which prohibits discrimination based on natural hairstyles and textures. As a long-term advocate for addressing food insecurities and food deserts in Virginia, she successfully championed a bill that created the Virginia Food Access Program and Invested Fund, which would help provide healthy and affordable food for all residents in Virginia. She was also part of the groundbreaking in a historic 2020 legislative session where she served as the first African American and the first woman to chair the House Transportation Committee. Additionally, as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, she chaired the subcommittee for K-12 education, and she previously chaired the Cancer Caucus, which raised substantial funds for cancer research. Delegate McQuinn is an ordained minister and assistant pastor at her home church, New Bridge Baptist Church in Richmond, Virginia. She is an international speaker, exquisite orator, and critical thinker, a change maker, a progressive policy advocate, a Christian disciple, and faith leader. She is a cancer and COVID-19 survivor, a wife, a mother, a very proud grandmother, a sister, and a friend. Delegate Delores McQuinn is always looking for ways to uplift and motivate others. The delegate has created a paradigm shift for the Virginia General Assembly to focus on equity and positive change. Also tonight, we gather with the Reverend Dr. Iva Elaine Carruthers. She is a social justice advocate and leader who has spoken and written about social issues that affect the Black diaspora. She is currently the General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, an interdenominational organization within the African American faith tradition focused on justice and equity issues. In 1967, she graduated from the University of Illinois at Chicago with a degree in sociology and French, and went on to Northwestern University, where she earned her Master of Arts in Counselor Education and PhD in Sociology in 1972. Her studies prepared her to take on the educational and social advocacy work she would become known for throughout her career. Before retiring to focus on her faith work full-time, Dr. Carruthers founded and ran Nexus Unlimited, one of the largest women-owned educational tech consulting firms in the nation. As an educator, Dr. Carruthers is held in high esteem. She is Professor Emeritus and the former chairperson of the Sociology Department at Northeastern Illinois University. In 1999, the university awarded Dr. Carruthers their Life Achievement Award. She has also spoken at the United Nations Civil Society Forums and other private and public institutions about racial and social justice. As a writer, she has penned and edited many articles and books that outline her vision for a greater society. Some of her more recent advocacy work includes fighting for reparations. She is a member of the National African American Reparations Commission and has called on the faith community to contribute and to support the organization's 10-point plan. The organization's 10-point plan includes social and economic development, affordable housing, and preserving Black sacred sites and monuments. As a champion for what is just, Dr. Iva Elaine Carruthers has created a master plan for future generations that values equality and justice for all. I quote, "Today's journey and all who meet the mark, the footprints of how you will be remembered as an ancestor. The blessing of legacy and legend is the divine space of elder grace, the responsibility and the opportunity to pass on wisdom and new possibilities to the next generation." Family and friends, it is my delight and my pleasure to introduce tonight the Reverend Dr. Iva Elaine Carruthers.
Well, welcome. As it was read, such distinguished guests we have tonight, all having a wide range of great expertise as scholar activists and political activists. So I first just want to yield the floor to you two with the general questions about reparations, what it means for you both at this moment, and how do you think this moment is significant in the reparations movement? I'll start with Delegate McQuinn, if you don't mind going first.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and to you, Cleve. I appreciate the opportunity to share with such distinguished guests on this panel. The question that you ask, and I often think about it and I share it with others, that these are certainly interesting times in several ways, in terms of a certain goodwill that exists in our society right now, in terms of individuals who may feel compelled to support these kind of efforts, individuals who are open-minded enough to say, you know what, we should have this discussion. There should be truth if we want to get to a place of reconciliation. Individuals who financially are in a position to look at the various aspect of this kind of work that need to be funded and say, you know what, I think it is appropriate, very appropriate for my company, for this institution to invest in this kind of work, but for so many ways. And so I think that is in terms of reparation and getting to healing and reconciliation, then this is a great time for that. But on the flip side of it, we are at a time also where we're talking about critical race theory, or they're looking at it as it's being looked upon as a boogeyman to sort of dismiss the history, to in many, I think, to alienate us in many ways. And so again, there are good times and some somewhat difficult times for us, as we, particularly those who are working in this area. But I think we have an opportunity also, if we have planned to get to a certain place on this journey and in telling this story, telling the stories, telling the truth, and making certain that we are engaging others in this. I think that it's important for us to build coalitions. Not only are African Americans being attacked, but the Jewish community is being attacked. Native Americans are being attacked in reference to their history, and if it's appropriate to be in schools, if it's appropriate to be told. Absolutely, I think that all of it should be told, and we are in a place now, as we, again, as Virginia, particularly because that's where most of my work has been, to look at this albatross that has been around the necks of African Americans for almost 402 years. to make certain that, first of all, the truth, if you want to get to reconciliation, if you want to get to healing, then by all means, a clear message needs to go out that the truth must be told. And now is the time to tell it. We cannot afford to hide it any longer.
Thanks, Delegate, so much. Dr. Carruthers.
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for the special invitation to allow me to sit at the table of this distinguished panel and to come to you as a member of the family and the state of Virginia. I am very, very grateful for having the invitations and the relationships that I have with the institutions that you represent, particularly Virginia Union University and the rich history of that institution, but also the sisterhood, the friendship, the professional collegiality of none other than Delegate McQuinn. She is a queen mother to us all, who did not come into this movement yesterday, but as you have heard, her bio speaks to years and years of service and sacrifice on this journey. And so I want to begin answering that question with lifting up the power of the ancestors who surround us, because at a very personal level, I would respond to your question by saying, I am answering and walking in the call of so many ancestors who have gone before, many most unknown, those whose blood, sweat, and tears have been the foundation of this nation and by extension, the world. Those who were on the continent of Africa who suffered what I call the Great Snatch. We name it the Ma'afa in Kiswahili, the great suffering of a people where a whole continent was depopulated. So I come lifting up those unnamed servants of God, believers in God, those faithful whose blood, sweat, and tears are on the ground. I come specifically in the spirit of Callie House, who in the United States is considered to be the mother of the reparations movement. But I am also very mindful of the spirit of a Fannie Lou Hamer, of a Coretta Scott King, of the many, of Mary McLeod Bethune, particularly the women, the Rosa Parks who have gone before, and certainly all the brothers. But in addition to that, we know that collectively it is by faith that we as a community come to this moment. And so I lift up the role of the Black church, the prophetic tradition of the Black church, which is really grounded in African spirituality. And I think we have to say that. And from that point of view and vantage, Virginia becomes at the epicenter of where so much of what we're trying to undo began. And it is for that reason then that not only do I stand in the memory of my four mothers and my four fathers, and I am reminded, as Delegate McQuinn has alerted us to, the call of truth-telling, of the slave document and transcription that was found serendipitously. They weren't looking for it. But in the National Archives, in which they found a bevy of interviews of former slaves, last living slaves, of enslaved persons, who were asked about their slave experience. One, Papa Dallas, told the story of how his niece asked him about his life as an enslaved human being. And he shared how he became blind. He became blind because his master said he had been disobedient and therefore burnt his eyes out with cigarette butts. And she began to cry. And he said to her daughter, "Don't cry for me, just remember to tell my story." And so I think that as we pick up this mantle of generations of those who have gone before, and as we envision where we are going in collaboration and building, as Dr. Cleve has said, the kind of new partnerships that will strengthen and forge our work ahead, we are called to remember Papa Dallas's call upon our lives, really upon our lives. Don't forget to tell my story. And so with that, the truth telling that is a prerequisite for where we stand at this point in time says to me that when I look back and I compare what powerful movements in the world have had to do, be, and experience to be successful, I am reminded that more often than not, there is a bad, deeply worse time that precedes the catapulting into a better time. And so I lift up the notion of the nadir, the bottom, the deepest valley that Rayford Logan gave us as a historian, and say we are once again in that deep valley as people of African descent in this United States or ununited States of America. But in that deep valley, in this inflection moment where the very spiritual forces of the demonic, of evil, of the horror are unleashed upon us in ways yet untold, I think we still are able to keep the faith and keep our eye on the prize, because we know that ultimately this cannot be about restoring something that never was. It is about reconstituting it. And that is why Virginia is ground zero, because so much of what was constituted as the foundation of this nation was done around Virginia. And therefore, as we move through this moment and historic period in our claim for reparatory justice, we move with the intentionality of reconstituting that which should never have been in the first place. And so some people ask questions like, why are you focused on the African American? Why do you hyphenate African American? How can we understand your struggle? And those can be important questions, but those are not the questions that we need our allies to raise. We need our allies to go and raise the questions in their community about what happened with the constitution of a fake narrative, which says all of us are equal, which denies the humanity of us as a reflection of the denial of their humanity. And so I join this conversation with a call for us to frame it as a conversation that is leading to the demand for truth-telling on a journey of reconstitution.
Thank you both so much. Such powerful statements from you both to open this up, and really sets the stage for the conversation, as Dr. Carruthers just said, we wanted to have today. I'm joined by our Director of Research, Dr. Mark DeYoung, and also our undergraduate research fellow, Mr. Daniel Thomas. And together we formed some questions. You two opened up with so much. You pretty much covered every question we had. So we're going to try to see what's left on the bone here. We'll alternate, Dr. DeYoung and I, and at the end, Dr. Thomas, I'm prophesying to you. Mr. Thomas will come with his later question then. So I'll yield now to Dr. DeYoung.
Thank you so much. This first question is actually for Dr. Carruthers. I want to kind of lean into what you were just talking about in terms of ground zero here in Virginia. As we talk about making the case for why we need reparations for African Americans in this country, what role do you think Virginia in particular plays, and how do we sort of bridge local conversations about reparations with a broader national or federal level conversation?
Well, I think it begins quite simply with the notion of community and we the people. And when we look at the notion of community and we the people, we will see that the history of Virginia is a history that represents a microcosm of both what happened in this nation's constitution, but also what is happening as a result of the consequences of a history of the white lion who landed on your shores. And symbolically, the white lion was both white and it was the roar of the demonic upon these shores that allowed for the creation of a narrative of freedom and liberty for we the people, ignoring the horrific foundation upon which the we the people was being founded. The actual stealing, commodifying, denial of humanity of an entire group of people in order to serve the economic interest and the psychological ego of a group of people who had come and settled on other people's lands. And to do that most awfully in the name of God. And so what we know is that this is a social, economic, a psychological, and indeed a spiritual battle. Because the God who was being prayed to on the top of that ship, including the prayer of Columbus, was not the same God of those who were at the bottom of the ship, who were handcuffed, who were denied any sense of human dignity as they made that trek through what is called the Middle Passage and landed in Virginia. And so Virginia, when you peel back the layers of Virginia's history, we see how the tobacco industry became foundational to the economic order. We see how policing and jailing and jailers became a profession in the context of slave catching. We juxtapose that, though, against the faith of a people who could turn a jail into an institution of higher education. Praise God, Virginia Union University and all those who fought and brought it to fruition. We see the ways in which Fort Comfort became the place of seasoning, of breaking, of Native people and of people of African descent and their leaders as a way to forge ahead. We see the mass graves that are being found connected to medical schools in Virginia. We see the ways in which young children have been stripped of their families on auction blocks in the history of Virginia. We see in which the fathers and mothers of Virginia became the matriarch and the patriarchs of a system of enslavement like none other, whose ripple effect we still experience nearly 500 years later. And so that's why Virginia is ground zero. And that's why I, as the General Secretary of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, a interdenominational global organization, network, and movement, is so delighted to be in partnership with you there, because ultimately this is a spiritual battle for the souls of not just America, but for the souls of all those who consider themselves to be human in the image of God.
Thank you so much. You both picked up on a point, and now people persons like myself and Dr. DeYoung, we're relatively new to Virginia. Something we both were shocked about was to learn about the long legacy, not only in history of civil rights, but even the recent past 20 years or so, all the work that's been going on here with you, Delegate McQuinn in particular, here in Richmond and in Virginia. So we were pretty astonished by this, to learn that there was a slave commission that you were part of, maybe you created. Can you tell us more about this slave commission, what it was about? Is it still around now? What was the results of the slave commission here?
Thank you. Yes, I'll be happy to. One of the things that, before I get to that, I want to just kind of share a little something with you in terms of just me getting involved with this work. And it had to do with the slave trail. When I initially traveled on the slave trail to do the slave trail tour, and I got to a certain part of that trail on the south side of the James River, where we actually initially started, was called Ann Carroll's Landing. And when I went to that particular area, something happened that day on that trail that changed my life forever. I often tell when I share it with people, I said, I don't drink alcohol and I don't smoke those funny cigarettes. So it wasn't one of those situations where someone could say, oh, that was just you on another level. But I encountered something that day on that trail. There was a spirit, a presence there that really just grabbed me, and I began to wail and travail uncontrollably on that trail that day. And it appeared that this certain spot that I was in, I couldn't even move out of the spot for a period of time. Just overtaken, just overcome with such grief. And that was in the 90s. It was like somewhere around 1996, 97. And the truth, ever since that particular situation happened, you know, I have been engaged in this work, but I remember being prayerful about it. You know, what happened? Exactly what did that mean? And I remember for months, I was sort of left in a place of wondering, of inquiring to God, you know, what happened? And I remember distinctly when the answer came very clear, and it was this. You didn't choose them, they chose you. And I have forever indebted to, as Dr. Carruthers talked about, our ancestors. And, you know, I realized that there are these great class of witnesses, you know, of our faith. And I believe that that's exactly what happened to me that day, that I encountered something that I had never even thought about in life, and it changed me forever. But I thought it would just be good to share that particular story of engagement on that trail and how it changed my life forever. But getting back to the trail and the work that, you know, I have had an opportunity to do, it is because of my I guess, research and knowledge of this peculiar institution. Of course, you know, I knew something about slavery, but never to the degree that I am aware of now. And then I was able to find, you know, or to identify the prominent role that Richmond played in, the capital of the Confederacy, in this, the institution or the constitution of this institution called slavery. How people, you know, were in a place, you know, in where I happen to be a part of right now, you know, making laws that will continue to perpetuate slavery. And I think the more I was able to learn about what had happened here in Richmond, a place that I was born and bred, and had no idea, no clue that Richmond was the epicenter of this, and right down in Shackle Bottom, of this slave trail, of the slave trade. And matter of fact, second to only New Orleans, that I think I began, along with others, to realize that, you know, it is such a powerful story of tragedy and triumph. And it was by individuals that looked like me, that it was individuals who were determined to live, determined to survive, determined to press their way forward in spite of their circumstances and situation. And I think I felt compelled to be as effective as I can, and as I was able to, in helping to tell their story, to help to give life to those individuals who had thousands and maybe millions who had come through Richmond, to give life to them, to make their lives relevant, and also to make sure that the generation who yet to come, that they would understand the magnitude of individuals who had no name, you know, who was dismissed as being humans, were treated inhumanely in every way that we could even think of, that to make sure that generations would know about them. And the trail is actually about 3 miles long. Again, starting from the south side of the river and to the north side of the river. But the story, again, of survival and triumph. Many may not know, or hopefully will have an opportunity to know that the other piece is the birthing of Virginia Union University, right down in Shockoe Bottom. And I have asked the question over and over again, how is it that this place could have been buried over 150 years by asphalt and ironworks, and no one realized it? Even with Virginia Union, there were individuals who came to take the tour who would say, I didn't know this. I went through Virginia Union all of these years. I had no clue. And that's why because there were such a, I guess, a degree of determination to keep this hidden, I was more so than ever compelled to make sure that we open it up. And so we did the excavation and was able to certainly identify the Lumpkins jail site, which again, out of that was the birthing of Virginia Union University. But not only was Virginia Union University's first classroom would have been held there, but we were able to identify in names 65 to 70 holding pens, jails, auction blocks, right down in Shockoe Bottom that someone knew, but obviously many of us didn't, about that particular area. And so based on that and my opportunity to be a legislator, I knew that God did not elevate me to this place to sit on this information, nor to do nothing to further to advance this agenda. When I went to the General Assembly, I realized that that was just another calling to a higher place. And so if the laws were constituted to institute, slavery, this peculiar institution, then by all means, I felt compelled to sit in those chairs and make sure that if Virginia had this much enthusiasm and determination to continue to perpetuate slavery, then I needed to do whatever I can to make sure that I perpetuate the understanding that reparation is absolutely necessary, essential. And so out of that, I was able to put legislation that we continue to work on in terms of advancing this agenda.
Thanks so much for that response, Delegate McQuinn. Dr. Carruthers, you've recently started a new Center for Reparative Justice at McCormick Theological Seminary. So if you don't mind telling us a little bit about the work that you're doing there and how you link the concept of reparative justice to issues of moral injury and harm.
Sure. And let me just begin by this whole notion of truth-telling and remembrance and the work that Delegate McQuinn has done, particularly around the slave trail and the elevation of a focus on the Transatlantic Slave Trade Commission work is a work that is going on all around the country. At the same time that Virginia many years ago commissioned a Transatlantic Slave Trade Commission, so did Illinois. And so as we grapple with truth-telling, one of the myths we have to embrace that was found out by the Illinois Transatlantic Slave Trade Commission, and I served as editor of that commission, was that there was slavery practice in Illinois. So this myth that slavery did not impact or did not occur up north is just that. It is somewhere between a myth and a lie that needs to be unraveled and spoken to. What I like to do is to think about the conceptualization of there were slaves who were commodified de jure by law, and then there were slaves who by de facto were enslaved. And that was what you found Northern style. And so those I term as enslaved with privileges. Now, when you read your history books, they're going to talk about them as freedmen, but the freedmen were not free. They were the enslaved with some privileges, and a privilege you bestow, which means that a privilege you can do what? Take away. And so that kind of critique, for example, that kind of analysis, for example, is the analysis and the critique that the Center for Reparatory Justice, Transformation, and Remediation has embraced as a necessary process as we move from truth-telling to actual remedy for the consequences of this history. And so what is so profoundly important, I believe, and has such great possibilities, I believe, for the McCormick Theological Seminary Center is that it is grounded in the first seminary or institution of higher education and theology, which is absolutely established as a priority, the connectivity between reparations and what it means to practice one's faith and a call to Christianity, but also in a general sense in terms of the moral authority and the way in which you see what it means to be human. And so this center has emerged out of and is committed to, one, creating processes and partnerships who will engage, be strengthened, committed to, attend to issues of truth-telling as a necessary prerequisite for us moving towards reparations, and that truth-telling cannot just be celebrated as an appendage, as the frame of a swing set without a swing, as a commemorative date where you honor somebody on January 15th for a moment, and it has nothing to do with what you do on January 16th. But it really has to move to what Martin Luther King talked about when he talked about a revolution of values. And a revolution of values speaks to what our sister Delores just reminded us of. She was changed on that Jericho road. And so a change is going to come. A change has come over me because of transformation. And so the partnership between the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference and McCormick Theological Seminary is a partnership that elevates truth-telling towards reparatory justice, but at the outcome of that being transformation in the minds, spirits, hearts, souls, bodies of us as a people. And that transformation then, if it is grounded in godliness, would, in fact, regardless of your faith tradition, suggest that there has to be remedy, that there has to be atonement, that there has to be apology, that there has to be a way to repair the harm that is being done, the harm that is not just physical, the harm that is not just financial, because there is not enough physical healing that can occur for the harm that's gone for my ancestors. There's not enough financial transactions that can occur for the harm that's gone for my foreparents. But there has to be a remedy in an effort to create institutional structures that will reconstitute what this nation is and what it means to say we the people. And so that center is specifically and uniquely positioned as a center that is going to push and push and push the moral agency, the spiritual barometer of this nation collectively in terms of its conscience, and individuals in terms of their individual consciousness until justice comes, which is the name of our website, Till Justice Comes.
Wow. Thank you both. So profound there. One movement happening now at this, as I opened the beginning, talk about this hot time, and part of I would consider repair is is naming. So at institutions I formerly belonged to theologically, buildings are being renamed because of former slaveholders. And now we're seeing the recognition of some of our ancestors more. Part of this reparations movement, as I see it, is about space and place, and it's significant. And Delegate McQuinn, we had the pleasure of going to a council meeting here, and we heard motions passed for allocations toward a slavery museum here in Richmond. Can you talk more about that work and how significant that is for what's going on now?
You know, you basically in your preliminary, I guess, articulating of your thoughts on space and places, you shared it. It is, you know, it is so essential. It is imperative that, and you were there. Thank you again for your involvement. Thank you to Dr. Carmichael for her involvement coming before City Council as we attempt to secure funding from them to help us to get to another place in terms of shouldering up a foundation. You know, we've got conceptually, we are already, you know, we have the Smith group of consultants that have been working with us. We have been working on this museum for quite a while, just conceptualizing it, doing conceptual designs, community engagement, just all of those things that it is necessary, you know, feasibility studies to put up, you know, a place and site and create space in the Shockoe Bottom area. And so this museum has grown out of a lot of work that the concept has grown out of a lot of work that has been done over the years. And so we went before City of Richmond asking for, and they put $500,000 in the budget so that we can continue to work in a more progressive manner. So we can advance this agenda more progressively. And to make certain that we are bringing people along with us, whether it is the university or individuals like Dr. Carruthers or other scholars across the nation, to bring people together so that they would understand, you know, what this site and what this place represent. And when I look at it, I've really sort of looked at it as a place in terms of the journey of African-American. How it tells our story in many ways, because it is authentic. It is an authentic site of enslavement, authentic place where emancipation took place, where education was finally given to those who have been enslaved, and it is a place of enlightenment. And we think that the place of enlightenment and empowerment, we're in that a particular, I guess, space and time, and the museum need to reflect all of it. Again, where truth is told, what a powerful, powerful legacy to leave to generations that will come. And I said it earlier, you know, I know we need to honor those who have gone on, who didn't have a voice, who was treated inhumanely, who wasn't recognized as a human being. And to say that this is to make certain that your story is told. And so we're at a place now with the state funding, funding from the city. We have to also raise additional dollars, but it is with every intention to build a national slavery museum there with, again, on ground zero, to tell the story of not just Richmond's history, not just the Commonwealth, but America's history, and the great injustice that was done to a race of people who this country whose shoulder this country was built on. So we are excited about what the city did, and the city had helped to fund in the past, but we really need to get them to another place. And I think that night, as you all came and spoke and testified to this, I think people were moved, as you could witness for yourself, that how essential it is for us to take that space and that place and develop something greater for generations that are yet to come.
Thank you so much for the work that you've been doing for so long around all
Bless
of
you.
these issues. Dr. Carruthers, we've seen some recent movement, maybe too little too late, on making headlines on kind of a piecemeal local scale in specific communities. I'm thinking of California, as well as Evanston, Illinois, right there by you in Chicago. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on some of these initiatives and the kind of infrastructure that they try to lay out. Do they go far enough? What more can be done? And how do we sort of bridge these local conversations about reparations with kind of making the kind of large scale national effort that we need to fully take place?
So it's my belief that we bridge it by first and foremost understanding the relationship to ideas and ideation, space and time, to then the practical steps of, therefore, where do we go from here? I'm reminded of the the corpus of work of Lerone Bennett, historian, who for so many years spent his time with Johnson Publications and Ebony Magazine. And he talked about the fact that image sees and image feels. And so the notion of space and time and space over time and how we use space becomes very foundational to how we think about ideas and who we are and whose we are and where we are. And so when we think about the Robert E. Lee statue and a timeline and a time capsule of what it meant and what its coming down means, that catapults us into this in 2021 becomes a very practical next step around remedy that is related to what a local community can do to move this agenda forward. And so in 2022, we look forward to the continuation of those kinds of efforts at the local level where they assess the way in which their public policy and individual policy has been complicit in the sustaining of these systems of white domination and white hegemony and white privilege towards the dismantling of them for purposes of reparatory justice. So having said that, we see how just doing an inventory of who is elevated in memorialization versus who needs to come down because image sees and image feels and image hurts and image speaks, right? We can go back to the deeds of property based on redlining and find out who was not able to get a mortgage because of the color of their skin, and thus 4 generations of their family have been denied access to wealth. In a country in which the capacity to have a house, to own property, is the basis around which most families have their generational capacity to pass on assets and resources. And in the case of Evanston, that's exactly what they did. Evanston is the first suburb north of Chicago, as Chicago was built on a concentric circle model where the downtown loop became the basis for which the economic prosperity occurred, and then people kept moving outside that inner circle into a ring. You finally got a suburban community called Evanston, in which Black people moved with their former masters or their former employees or employers, quote, as domestics. And so you have generations of communities and families of Black people in Evanston, Illinois that can go back to the 1800s, right on the lakefront, privileged, high-valued land, who were living in houses on that land when it was not valued, who we now have the evidence of how the city not only took that housing from Black owners, but actually took it and moved their houses to another part of the city that became the segregated Fifth Ward. And so as Evanston as a community, the last 3 years, well, really it's been more than 3 years, it started 20 years ago, as they began to talk about reparations, fast forward, came up with a remedy that said we can get consensus around housing and making adjustments and giving grants for the known ways in which housing discrimination impacted Black families through a program of reparations. But to your point, Mark, what we know is that we have states who are now having these conversations. We have more than 300 small communities who are now having these conversations. And we have institutions of higher education, churches, denominations, and communions who are now having this conversation at both the local level and the global level.
Thanks so much. I want to pivot back now to other work ongoing that's been going on here in Richmond and Virginia in particular. Delegate McQuinn, if you can tell us about your work on a reconciliation statute. Both of you have mentioned there can be no reconciliation without truth-telling. Tell us about that work with the reconciliation statute, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a interesting, I guess, in my period of being extremely naive when it comes to when the reconciliation statute actually was erected. And it reflects actually, or it is one of three in the world. There is one that's in Benin, West Africa, as well as Liverpool, England. And it reflects the triangular existence of the slave trade and how those major entities and the role that they played in, one in building ships and then moving the ships to Africa together and then coming back to the US and Caribbeans and whatnot in terms of to drop off their cargo. And you know what the cargoes are, and they were Africans that were dropped off. But we did, when we initially erected the reconciliation statute, and folks came from Africa and Liverpool to have a conversation before the city council at that time. And there was some pushback from some of the African-American communities who were saying, okay, you want to erect a reconciliation statute, but there is no reconciliation has not begun. And I, again, if I had to do it all over again, I probably would think a little more deeply and explore a little more and research a little more. However, we have the good thing that have come out of that is that we have been able to use symbolism as a way to say, we are at this place. As a matter of fact, Tim Kaine was the governor at that time. He came and apologized. It was the first time that there was acknowledgement of the slavery that existed in the Commonwealth and the role that the Commonwealth played in it. And so he apologized at that time. And we had individuals from all over the world that came to be a part of this. But the reality is that it has given us the opportunity and in many ways, a reason to continue to push this agenda. The agenda of, of acknowledging the slavery that exists and the role that the capital of the Confederacy played in it. And the fact that if we have any desire at all of getting to a place of healing and reconciliation, then there's still so much work to be done. And individuals, everyone need to be at the table. And I think that it has been even more, it's been such a greater understanding of how important this is, after the George Floyd's death and the uprising and the racial upheaval that occurred as a result of that, we have no intention of just laying down our swords, and not demand that we get to another place. And the only way that it will happen, again, is to address this issue of reparation. And no longer, will generations, sit on the sideline and say it is okay, if we don't talk about it. It is a demand, that we're demanding that it be discussed. We're demanding that it be in history books. And we can see what's happening. I was telling some of my colleagues last week, I said, don't be under any illusion, okay, that this whole issue of critical race theory is about critical race theory that was, the scholars put in place 40 years ago. It is about our discussion on Black history in the history books and reflected in, in schools. It is about, the issue of equity that we've been talking about for so long now. They are just trying to, I personally feel that they are just trying to say, let's get in front of this with this big boogeyman, critical race theory that's not even being taught in Virginia, and see if we could put the stops on it, see if we could pull the stops on this. And that's what it's all about. And so, the louder, the more they push, the louder we have decided we're going to be in reference to this. And so it is much more to come. But you know what? That statue is there. We are using the fact that it is erected for the benefit of advancing this agenda, advancing the conversation to make sure that people understand if you want reconciliation, it does not come unless there is the issue of reparation, restorative justice, those things that have been left out of the equation and have not been made readily available for African Americans.
Thanks so much, Delegate. That's an important conversation around reconciliation, mostly related to the terms in public discourse, critical race theory. Great plug there. We'll be hosting here at the center a conversation later on, about a week or so here at the center, about critical race theory, its problems in public discourse. That's one of the sessions we'll be doing this month. We've also asked our undergraduate research fellow, Daniel Thomas, to not only join us today, but he's been active in making sure that we get students involved in these conversations. And so we'll conclude our time with a question from Mr. Thomas here.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Tinsley. First, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be a part of a distinguished panel and discussion. Just to be a part of, to see my mentors and the shoulders in whom I stand on, I am humbled and honored to be a part of this conversation. And either person can answer the question, or if both, that would be great. For a student and young adults, what do you recommend, or how can we become a part or get into the fight and advocate within our generation, a part of the reparation movement, and just everything that we've discussed thus far in the conversation? How can we as young adults and young scholars, budding young scholars, be a part of that conversation or that fight?
Well, I'll start and lift up the importance of what I call transgenerational mentorship. And part of that speaks to the value of having persons like yourself and the foresight of persons like Dr. Tinsley, engaging persons like yourself in this kind of process. What is so very, very important is that as a scholar, you commit to what it means to do the kind of deep thought and deep reflection and deep analysis that leads to transformation and not superficial change. And that becomes so, so very important in a world in which you all have grown up with, much to my dismay, with the technology using you instead of you using the technology. Grown up with an expectation that answers occur in a minute and that you can do it the fast way and get to the end point. When I pick up on what Delegate Delores just spoke about in terms of the reconciliation and connect that to this conversation around mentorship, I want to say a few things that involves me sharing my story with one of my mentors, okay? So one of my mentors was John Henry Clark, the historian who we all know. And in fact, I was the executor of Dr. Clark's estate. And so he was like a father to me. I give honor and glory and praise to him as an ancestor who walks with me daily. But Dr. Clark, one of his last admonishments to me was to say, daughter, I want your generation to be prepared that you're going to have to defend yourself against scholarship, which says that the enslavement of African people is the blame for that is to be blamed upon African people because it was African chiefs that sold you into slavery. And so he said, be prepared for having to argue against the fact that a few chieftains who were either forced to or corruptible enough to get engaged to that which they did not know on the other end in terms of what would happen to their people, because their understanding of what it meant was very different. You are going to have to defend that in the coming century. And young scholars need to be prepared to deal with that, because that is going to be part of the argument used against you.
Yes.
Reconciliation is a concept that is biblical and it is socio-political, yes. But I like to use the metaphor of airplane ride versus walking from Virginia to California. The easy way to go is to go to the airport, get on a plane, and you end up at your destination called Reconciliation City in California, right? But that is not how this works in terms of reparatory justice. You got to go up the rough side of the mountain to peel back the layers of truth, to confess your complicity in sin, to then make apology, remedy, commit to not repeat, and then figure out how you can get the forgiveness and the steps towards repair that allows for you to even come to a table to talk about reconciliation. The role of young scholars is to attend to those kind of deep thoughts and deep issues and to come up with the ways that connect the dots between what is appropriate for the acknowledgement and the apology, and then what becomes the appropriate remedy towards that end. And so we need you, young scholars. We need you to walk with us, to learn from us, but also to teach us what the new tools of technology are doing in terms of algorithms being used by Facebook to get you to think a certain kind of way, in terms of data mining, getting you to believe that a certain kind of idea is the idea. And that brings me to this critical race theory, fake news, which we've already talked about. But I want to talk about how the fake news is really, really getting manifest. I'm going to take the liberty to just read a text I got from one of my colleagues who is a national officer at a denomination who has, just to keep it real, she has 3 secretaries helping her do her work. So you know how much work and ministry she has to do. But she never says no to an opportunity to mentor. And so she was asked by some children, high school children in Iowa, would she come talk to them? And she said yes, put it on her calendar and schedule, and was prepared to do that. And the professor wrote to her just before she was scheduled to speak. And this is what the professor said to her. The student will enjoy that topic. We just had a significant Black Lives Matter protest after a racist situation. So this will be a welcome topic. And I almost forgot to mention the new Iowa law. We are not supposed to talk about the state or nation being systemically racist. And we cannot talk about white male privilege, but we can acknowledge racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. We just can't make anyone feel guilty. So, for example, you can talk about redlining and call it a racist practice, but you can't say that it was a part of a systemic problem. I do not agree with the law at all, but we are requested to share this information. I am embarrassed to even share this with you. Red state politics, don't blame you. Maybe we will learn what we must learn. in order for young scholars like you to say it's not enough for me to stay just in the space of ideation, I got to go create some institutions to make sure my children know what they need to know to have control over their identity. And if you're a white young scholar, I commend you to go to the white community and teach the truth. I commend you to pierce the veil of what I call IDDS. IDDS, it means identity delusion, and denial syndrome. It means that we are living in a nation in which the notion of exceptionality and our identity as white people, quote unquote, is delusional, based on the notion that we are the exception. And it also means that we are in denial about the gifts of other people. And as a result of that, we are sick in mind, body, and spirit. So whether you are a white scholar or a Black scholar, young or old, we have got to embrace a new way of thinking and a destination to which we are headed that will take us to reconciliation, but not before truth-telling and reparatory justice. And that's my last word.
So powerful. I mean, I feel those words as a kind of ancestral lesson, not just for Mr.
Yes.
Thomas, but also for all young people who may be watching today. It's a perfect segue. And I dare not then conclude without also receiving that kind of extension by Delegate McQuinn as well. Please address our young folk, if you don't mind, our young scholars coming.
It is criminal to ask me to go behind Dr. Carruthers after that, because I am just like, okay, let it be. So let it be said, let it be done. You know, I really don't have a lot to add to that. I mean, again, she's basically said, you know, glean from those who have wisdom, who have already cleared the pathway, who walked the road, and they can help you. I often share with young people that I got started on this journey when I was 11 years old, working and for not working for them, or working with Senator Henry L. Marsh, Oliver Hill in their law office, going over there, just sitting there among these guys, these giants, and listening to Nathan, Mrs. Dale. I mean, there were just individuals that I had the privilege of being around to help feed my mind, feed my spirit, you know, help me to get the confidence that I needed, you know, to stand up and speak and to speak on certain issues. It was, I mean, there is no greater, to me, wealth that you could obtain in terms of this sort of, I guess, intellectual understanding of the landscape. You know, when you have an opportunity to sit among people like Dr. Carruthers, like Dr. Tinsley, all of you, like Dr. Carmichael, to learn from them about their experience on this road. And, you know, and to learn about, you know, not just, we talk a lot about enslavement, but I mean, after enslavement, after 1865, then came all of these other oppressive, I mean, ways of keeping African-American down. So it wasn't just, you know, we went through slavery and then, you know, it was all over. It was the Black Code, it was Jim Crow, it was massive resistance. And even today, Dr. Carruthers talked about redlining in terms of the housing, the health disparity, you name it, in every area that in every area of life, you can be certain that African Americans have been discriminated against and left behind. And so I would just encourage, you know, to have a zeal for this, have a passion for this, and then have a compassion for the people that you know that you are standing there on their behalf, trying to explain to on a bigger stage what is going on and what is necessary for them. One of the things that I have just often looked at when I talk about this kind of work that, and I hope I can hold myself together, but there are 4 housing developments that I represent, and I've been representing for 25 years. When I see what people that live in those communities have to live with and deal with, and people are saying, oh, we're beyond that. No, we're not. Because there are those who want to leave, but cannot find the pathway out. There are those who want the resources to get to the next place. They just don't have it. And as Dr. Carruthers talked about, one of the bigger subject matter that I often talk about is generational wealth. And I tell my colleagues, everything we do must be about generation wealth, establishing generational wealth for the next generation. And communities like those housing developments, those individuals who they don't see a way out, but they just represent a very small percentage of individuals all over this country. But it's always in the front of my mind that what I'm doing is for those folks who live in the housing projects and how to help them better see who they are, where, they didn't choose this. You know what I'm saying? It was generations before them that found themselves in this situation that they could not get out of. And for some of them, it's been 5 generations. And so as you gather, as you become very passionate about this, make sure that there's a compassion that exists as well. But wisdom, having the wisdom and the particular discipline that you feel that you need to go in, I think that's so very important to gain from individuals who have some knowledge and very well have lived this day in and day out.
Thank you both so much. It's so rich, and we're profoundly honored here at the Center for African American History and Culture and Virginia Union for such a rich and robust conversation. Dr. Marquita Carmichael directs our community engagement and faith-based initiatives, and she often challenges us about the institutions, not just as researchers, as churches, as communities, how we link up. And so we've asked Dr. Carmichael to come and conclude us in the spirit of forming more coalitions. And we just began our conversation, right? We'll be having these conversations over the next years, looking for ways to form coalition. But we'll yield now to Dr. Carmichael to come conclude us however she wishes. Thank you again for your time.
So thank all of you, Dr. Carruthers, Delegate McQuinn, Dr. DeYoung, and Dr. Tinsley, and Mr. Thomas. Thank you all so very, very much. I want to share with you a term that I heard first at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference prayer line, and that term is Sawubona. And Sawubona is a Zulu word. It is a form of greeting, and it means we see you. We see you, we respect you, and you are important to us. And when we say we see you, it's not just me see you, but me, my family, my tribe, my ancestors, my elders, all of us together, we see all of you and your family and your ancestors, your tribe and your people. This conversation says to me that we are seen. We are seen. The fact that we are engaged says that we respect one another and we respect our history. We respect how we got here. And this work is so essential. It is important for each of us to know where our part of the particular rope is. What is our particular piece of this journey and how do we get to it? So I want to thank you all again for not counting it robbery to come. I want to lift up, if I can, just in form of a blessing, that I don't know whether or not when we call upon our ancestors to draw nigh, sometimes I feel in my imagination that the clouds of the sky roll back and our ancestors lean over a little bit closer to hear and to see what it is that we are doing with what they have given to us. So I want to give thanks today for Luther Allen and Mary White Allen, for Obadiah Jordan, and for Lorraine Allen Jordan. I want to give thanks today for Paige and Leanna Banks. And I want to give thanks today for John Wesley Banks and for Iva McMurray Banks, for the daughters that they have gifted to us and to this world, for the works that they have been entrusted with in this generation. I want to thank you for allowing yourselves not only to be women in this struggle in the spirit of Nana Ya Asantewa, of the Asante people, but that you would also be women grounded in truth, knowing that victory is sure, and that your voices are necessary in this hour. So now, to the one who is eternal and everlasting, to the one who makes sure that all of our steps are guided, to the one who makes sure that there is steel in our spine for the journey, to the one that encircles us with agents for help and comfort, for those who provide arms that will rest until victory is sure. We give thanks. In Salbona, we see you, we honor you, we respect you. You are important to us. Many, many blessings, ancestral, many, many blessings, eternal. Ashe and amen.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming. Follow next week. Delegate McQuinn has community meeting around the National Slave Museum here at Virginia Union. Will be hosting her in her meeting. Also follow next week. Proctor conference is here. Lively conversations. Be sure to follow the work of Dr. Iva Carruthers and the great work of Carruthers. Until next time, we'll see you later, friends. Thanks for joining us.
See you later. God bless. Bless you.